Okay, thank you for uh, this part of discussion on humanitarian logistics. If you remember our previous episode on humanitarian logistics, we tried to define what's humanitarian logistics and then what scope we come across or touch upon the humanitarian agendas or humanitarian issues for different organizations or for different missions at different events or disasters, or we can say situations. So having that brainstorming clarities, we proceed to our next topic of interest is the humanitarian context. Now, if you are brief on humanitarian logistics and then in what situations we touch upon on humanitarian aspects, and then we try to touch upon the agencies or aid agencies or global or national, or we can say local aid agencies engaged in humanitarian aspects. Now, to sum up, the humanitarian context or the scope of humanitarian logistics is either relief or development activities. Well, basically, uh, even though the aid organizations, especially the global aid organizations, are focused on relief organizations, the general concepts on humanitarian activities are relief activities and development activities. You see, to make it clear on the relief concepts or development concepts, if you look the relief, it's an emergency situation or an emergency response for food, shelter, and services, for an immediate response for any disasters, right? That disaster may be natural disaster or man-made disaster or both. It will just respond immediately right after that disaster is happening. Now, think of these short-term objectives or purpose of humanitarian logistics. And second one is development is more of for sustainability, for development, for social and economical development, or for rehabilitation and maybe reconstructions of victims or sufferers. Well, by its definition, basically, development is related to creating self-sufficiency and sustainability of community. Well, basically, these aid organizations are interested on development because of long-term objectives for community sustainability and community self-sufficiency. Well, look, for example, for different nations, the first world countries or second world countries, or maybe for third world countries, are contribute for this disaster prevention or this disaster prevention activities. If you look, for example, America or United States contribute 33% of humanitarian aid, and then the European Union countries gain 10% of total aid for victims or for any needed or needy community. Other Maybe European countries, other Western European countries like Canada, Japan, Australia are also major donors to aid agencies in business responding to the disaster. Again, some of individual donors like Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation also contribute or as a source of fund for aid for finance aid organizations. Now we can categorize these eight organizations into three, right? The first is under the umbrella of what you call United Nations, like World Health Organizations, United Nations High Commission for Refugees are under the umbrella of United Nations. The second category for aid organization is international organizations. Look, the International Federations of Red Cross and Red Crescents, which operate as a federation with country offices that are as an auxiliary to country governments. The third category for global non-government organizations. These are NGOs like CARE, World Vision, and a number of global government organizations are part and parcels of aid organizations. Now look what factors that affects for humanitarian relief. One thing, you can imagine the disaster occurrence or the number of disasters in different nations or in the globe at large. So it's increasing time to time, and then organizations are responsible to respond or respond this humanitarian community or this humanitarian what you call community victims. So one of the reason is the number of disasters increasing time to time is one of the factors that challenge to aid organizations. Second one is donors. What are the donors? Actually, donors are becoming increasingly demanding with respect to performance and impact. But still, the donors, with because of the increasing, because of the number of aid organizations or aid agencies are increasing, and to fulfill the requirements or the need for that disaster is unbalanced, meaning even though the number of donors are increasing time to time and the disaster is increasing at alarming rate, which is not proportional with the number of donors and the number of disasters. That's also one of the challenge. uh, so what questions we need to address in disaster is we have to be clear on the events this disaster consequence or disaster consequence on community, on infrastructure, on facilities, on the general effects of that disaster. We have to be clear on that. Look, for example, what's the status of the infrastructure in terms of transportation, healthcare, telecommunication, housing, emergency services like police and fire department, even the governmental readiness to respond to disasters. And then who are impacted after disaster. Look, for example, maybe women and children or those what called disadvantageous groups may be impacted more than others. Therefore, we have to give priority in the consequence of the disasters. The other issue is how much it is heavier to affect the community, right? Think of the disasters and then how much that severity or degree of impacts on the community or on the infrastructure, on the resources too. Another, what are the need for the population impacted. Therefore, if that impact disaster is happening, and then we need to identify the need assessment. We go through the needs of the population, which is the victims, and then we have to avail maybe immediate response, maybe for medium-term response, and then long-term response for those victim populations. And then maybe the next issue is who is going to help, right? Who is going to take the responsibility to maybe relieve them or to reconstruct and rehabilitate them, and even to develop in terms of social, economical, and in different aspects or spheres of the community. So we have to go through these questions and come up with an answer on these basic questions in relation to the existing disaster. Move to how these aid operations are performed, and then who is going to be responsible, how to manage that disaster, what type of plan is needed, and then what are the preparedness actions required, what type of critical supplies like water, food, medicine, shelter are needed, and in what amount. We have to calculate. We need to compute and understand the needs of in terms of relief, maybe for immediate response, and then further needs too. What are the mechanisms and process for distribution? What type of distribution is needed to avail or access to the victims? And how should the influx of personnel, information, material be handled, processed, and delivered? So those supportive activities are also important to be an effective and efficient humanitarian logistics management. Now, see, once we perform the humanitarian context, and then once we understand the disaster or the severity of disaster or the consequence of disaster, and then we need to measure the humanitarian effectiveness and efficiency. One thing in terms of to minimize the human sufferings, right? Meaning we have to save the lives, we have to save just the human sufferings in relation to that disaster or the consequence of that disaster or the effects of that disaster. One. And second, to save this life or to save the people of the community, we need to calculate the logistical costs in terms of procurement, in terms of logistics, in terms of warehouse, in terms of distribution, in terms of information, and just in terms of right, a number of activities there. Therefore, we need to calculate the logistics costs to fit the requirements or to save the human sufferings. Now, if we are performing such human activities, humanitarian logistics activities, and then we may face a number of challenges. As much as possible, we need to curb this challenge. Look, one of the challenge for humanitarian logistics effectiveness and efficiency is look the importance of logistics is underestimated, meaning its lack of recognition for its importance. Therefore, it has to be eliminated. It has to be focused on this. If there is a logistics contribution in underestimated or undercalculated, and then it will affect the performance of humanitarian activities. That means. And second, the staff composition or professions should come across different knowledge, skills, and even competencies can be accrued or what you call accumulated. Otherwise, professional staffs. If there is lack of professional staff, then if you faced such a problem, that's also one of the challenge for humanitarian logistics. The other is technological utilization, maybe technological adaptation or adaptations to facilitate the humanitarian logistics matters too. The other is institutional learning. Maybe in terms of institutional learning, you can see for short-term learning, medium-term learning, or long-term learning, how institutions are handle the humanitarian profession as a profession, and then try to provide maybe in terms of just certification or under a diploma level or degree level or postdoc level or doctoral levels, and as other levels of certification for this profession matters too. The other is what called collaboration matters too, right? Collaboration among stakeholder matters too for humanitarian logistics efficiency. Look, the government, different private institutions, aid organizations, even the community engagement and the local, national, international engagements or involvements for any disaster matters too. Therefore, this is also one of the challenge for humanitarian logistics. So the details for the challenge. Look, for example, if you look the first challenge for recognition for importance. So remember our previous episode on humanitarian logistics. One of the focal points for humanitarian organizations are engaged in for programs or support services. The major programs for humanitarian organizations are in terms of relief or development. Right? This is maybe relief for short term and development for medium and long term objectives. The second activity is supportive services. Look, for example, logistics activities, technological utilization, finance, communication, and human resources. Profession matters, and how logistics perceived as or take as a profession, and then as a profession and in need of knowledge, skills, and competency in relation to humanitarian activities. Technology, maybe if you look the survey of logicians that participated in tsunami relief operation, showed only 26% of the respondents had access to any tracking and tracing software. Right? Technology, lack of technology on humanitarian activity matters too. Right? Look what type of technology is utilized, and then it needs latest or updated technology to be effective and efficient for humanitarian logistics. Same is true for institutional learning, and then collaboration among trading partners matters too. Now, in addition to the challenge, basically what barriers, what gaps and trends for humanitarian logistics. If you look through, if you go through in detail about humanitarian logistics practices in different nations, you see one of the issue is uncertainties. Things uncertain, disaster is uncertain, whether it's man-made or what called a natural disaster. It's uncertain, and it couldn't estimate or predict the events or the occurrence of that problem. Right? Think of the demand and time, location, and even available supplies. Challenge in collaboration among multiple players and decision makers in humanitarian supply chain, the impact of even the political, cultural, socio-economic conditions of the region, the strong dependency of last mile operations, meaning we don't know what will happen, and we don't know what's happening. We couldn't estimate and predict what will happen, and then we are trying to just engage most of our efforts on response, which is reactions, right, in relation to the disasters, in relation to the consequence of disasters, instead of preventing or in advance planned on humanitarian disaster events. Telecommunications, the infrastructure matters too, and again we can see the for degraded infrastructure, communication, human resource, and you're making a lot allocations of funds, so a number of issues there. So why uncertainty for humanitarian logistics? One of the problem or the challenge or the barrier for humanitarian logistics effectiveness and efficiency is uncertainty. Look at the operating conditions, how humanitarian logistics activities are operated, in which situation are we in. Look the equipments, what you want to utilize or used. Look the political climate, how much is volatile. Look the staff engagement, the staff motivation, and even the staff satisfaction in relation to humanitarian activities. And look the stakeholders, the number of stakeholders who are interested to respond such problems. And look the suppliers, supply availability or uncertainties. And then look even the end users management or requirements, their preference, and look the end users management. You can take the maybe a refugee camp crisis or the refugee camp management too, when we have unknown problems on uncertainty of what we call humanitarian logistics. Now we have to come up with a solution